meeting to, we'll bring the SDIC November 30th meeting to order. I'm going to do a roll call and we'll bring Annalise in when she shows up. Tammy Stephenson.
Present. And
Tom Hansel is present.
So and Chris Damgen is not present.
Yeah, Chris is away. He's off on leave. And I know Alex is standing in for him this morning as well. Taylor Steenbach is sliding into my chair effective the end of this month or end of December. So and Taylor's no stranger to this effort as well. And Annalise,
great.
If you're present, just let us know. Annalise Kohler, present? Yep, thank you. Okay, so thank you, Jim and Wendy, for putting this meeting together. I know Brian's been working with Armand on this topic. So I'm going to turn it over to, let's see, we have a pretty simple agenda today, just to review this discussion. Jim, thank you for the memo. It kind of outlines our discussion today. Who would like to open this discussion today?
I will, by just saying I appreciate help from Brian and Tanny and others who are trying to improve the product of the legislation. And I hope we've at least made some distance in trying to address the concerns you've raised. I look forward to understanding them better and continuing to work with you to increase your comfort level with how we're moving forward.
And Tanny, just to follow on Jim's comments, I do appreciate your role on the urban board as our interim SDIC representative. So, and thank you for bringing your concerns forward to Brian.
Yeah. Quite welcome.
So, we could try and talk through the memo, or it sort of speaks for itself. We've attempted to address the indemnification and timing of dissolution issues with the additional modifications. Tanny, I know you have some concerns about the timing. I don't know whether you want to, I want to be supportive of an effort that improves the product. So how can I best do that?
Yes, I would say maybe, do you want to start, Brian, and run through? That might be best.
Sure. So, was there a memo that was distributed?
Yeah, it was attached to the meeting invite. I'm deeply sorry if you don't have it. Let's see if I can find the
Brian,
date.
you might check your junk mail. It's that new email distribution list.
It was set Wednesday at 10:50 a.m.
So yesterday?
Yesterday.
Sorry, it was slow coming, but with Thanksgiving and whatnot, we...
All right.
I'll send it again, see if it comes through. Not to put you on the spot to comment on something you've not seen. That's not great form. Sorry about that. We could pull it up on screen
and
too.
And Brian and all, I'm happy to open it up as Brian opens that.
That seems like it might be fruitful. Thank you, Armand. Give Brian a chance to look at what we produced. I'm sorry, Brian.
Okay.
No, just real briefly, Armand Resto Spots, counsel for NCDD here. It's good to see some familiar faces since I was with the district several months ago. Thanks for everyone for being here this AM. In brief, this is in the memo, but real briefly, today's work session, we saw as an opportunity to discuss with some specificity, at least talk about game plan or road mapping, the road toward dissolution, and some questions that come up toward that end. And in particular, this involves the proposed legislative modifications to ORS 550 with the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District, and how those modifications may or may not impact or affect SDIC in the future. And so we'll go over some background I think would be helpful, just real briefly as the memo outlines. I wonder if Colin, it might be prudent for you to open it up just to briefly mention the legislative proposal, the status of where that's at. And then there's some specific questions and topics that are highlighted in the memo. And these were brought about in discussion between myself and Mr. Sheets, Brian here, we talked a little bit about some of the practical impacts and practical next steps for SDIC or any dissolved district. And so some natural questions came up with respect to assets, debt distribution, things of that nature. So those topics are highlighted in the memo, and we can get to specific questions regarding those. But I think it might make the most sense to just briefly start with the legislative modifications that have been proposed. Would you mind doing that, Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Armand. So Colin Rowan, Director of Planning Public Affairs at MCDD. And just to briefly review just our process here. So in September, we brought some draft legislative modifications to the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board. This was modifications to ORS 550, as Armand mentioned, to be introduced in the 2024 short session of the Oregon Legislative Assembly. That initial set of modifications were reviewed by our board, as well as some additional stakeholders in a government relations group. And we got some really important direction and feedback from the board. They did bring it to a vote where the board approved staff to pursue making these legislative modifications. But there were some important pieces, and want to thank Tanny as well as Brian, Mr. Sheets, for making those suggestions. And so those were incorporated into the modifications that were submitted to committee staff or legislative council to create into language. So let me just briefly review what those modifications are, can answer any questions, and then go through some of the questions that are in the second part of the memo. So the two big things that were introduced in that language. One is to transfer the property assessment authority from the legacy districts to the urban board. So currently in ORS 550, Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District does not have the authority to levy property assessments, similar to what the legacy districts currently have. After a long effort of trying to make the service fees work, we really ran into a major issue around implementation and the collectability of doing that. And so to be able to move forward with some important work, including being able to issue a general obligation bond and to be able to move forward on important work with the Army Corps of Engineers, we do need to have a sustainable revenue methodology. And so continuing with the assessments is something that the property owners in the managed floodplain are familiar with. We also know that it has a really low cost, generally 0%. If people pay in full early, then there's a 3% discount, but there's also a really high.
Colin,
yes.
Just for time, we only have 45 minutes. If you can kind of, I'm assuming most people have read the amended changes, but a quicker review, please.
Thanks for keeping me focused, Tom.
Yeah, not so deep on this stuff.
Yeah, the other important, not much, I appreciate it. The other important change is a flood safety benefit fee. Working with Jeff Condit, agreed that this was a fee and not a tax. That was responsive to feedback that we received from the urban board. And so we were able to make that and capping that at 3%. And then the points that were brought up by Tanny in behalf of SDIC were real clear indemnification language. So that is included and solidified and is backed up by other things that were existing in the legislation currently, as well as Oregon tort law and other things. So this made it really clear. And so we have made those changes. There was also an issue that was around sort of the creation of a quote zombie board to clarify that all of the transition and transfer of assessments would happen on July 1st. So all those things have been made and clarified in the language that was submitted. yeah, if there's any questions about that, I can go into the details. And again, thanks, Tom, for streamlining me.
Thanks, Colin. I just want to make sure we have discussion in this debate. Brian?
Hey, thanks, Tom. Yeah, unfortunately, I did not receive that memo yesterday, and so I was just trying to skim it as quickly as possible to see if any of the issues that I brought up with Armand had been adequately addressed within this. I mean, like I've discussed with Armand before, I did have some issues with the how assets will be transferred with the with our real estate holdings to the urban board, making sure that it's a clean transition and it doesn't leave any sort of questions there as far as who exactly has title with that. The last thing I want to see is landowners sort of in this question of was title adequately transferred at the end of this process, because I don't want to have either the landowners or the urban district having to go through any sort of quiet title actions to figure out exactly what's happening. So making sure that those kinds of ends are tidied up. And then the other thing I had was the SDIC reserves at the end of the calendar year, at the end of the dissolution being segregated, so that they are applied to projects within the district. I see that there was mention of that. Cash balance at the end of June 30th, 2024 on transfer of their urban district, to the effect that that is properly segregated there and binding on the new urban district, that that will be there, so that those funds are adequately put into a segregated fund, not a fungible fund, so that those are adequately addressed there. And then also, I believe there was a question about the section, I believe it was section 8, talking about, wait, now it's section 7 now, having a potential for a board vacancy after dissolution. I don't know exactly how that would be mechanically possible, because if there's no urban board or no SDIC board or representative, if there's a vacancy available afterwards, I think the mechanics of that is a little wonky. This is one of the first times I've had an opportunity to really discuss that.
Just so I guess I did work with Jeff closely on that, so it is explicit in there now that would transfer. You know, if so, in the case of there's basically a 6-month period, July 1st to say December 31st, while the existing initial board will continue to operate the new district. And so there's representatives, including a representative of SDIC. And so the question or concern was, if that SDIC representative needed to leave the board for whatever reason, how would SDIC still have a seat? And so that was what was clarified in that updated section 7 to make it clear that the initial board would need to appoint a new board member, director who resides or owns property or represents the owner of property. So similar to what the current SDIC requirements for a board member are. So they would need to appoint someone that meets all the existing criteria.
Okay.
Colin, are you suggesting we would do that before we're dissolved?
No, so the dissolution would take place on July 1st. And so I think the really good point that Mr. Sheets brought up was that what if, so whoever you have as your representative on July 1st would sit on the initial board and still represent SDIC through basically until the regular or the elected board is seated. And so if someone needed to leave, how would you make sure that someone from SDIC's geography would continue to be represented? And so that's what Jeff had added in that updated section 7.
So I haven't seen that update. Is that has that been distributed yet?
Yes, and that's in the memo. And so that was sent out to all of the urban board members ahead of, so I guess that was sent out on November 9th to them. And then you all received it just yesterday, but it is in the memo.
So Colin, or just the group, I just want to throw out, if Tanny is representing, he's the representative from SDIC, which has been dissolved. You know, it's Tanny, I know he's very capable, but what if we just had the Legacy District board members, interim board members, just sunset July 1st?
Off of the interim board? Is that what you're proposing?
I'm just throwing that as a question. What would that, I mean, it would kind of take away all of the indemnification. And, you know, all the 4 representatives from the legacy districts, they have no home, you know, Tanny's not, he's not a landowner there. He's a representative for SDIC, which is now gone. So I just pose that as, you know, has that been considered? Was that a nice?
My sense is that runs counter to the desire to ensure there's a continued legacy district influence and knowledge transfer to the new board. But no, we haven't considered that, but would be interested in what people think of it.
And so that suggestion would be, we would change on July 1st from a 17-member initial board to a 13-member initial board, and have the other representatives stay and not have the legacy districts. Is that correct, Tom?
That's what it's more of a question. It hasn't been, I'm not recommending it. I'm just posing as a question. Had that been considered, and what would be I haven't run the pros and cons. I'm not close enough to this, you know, transition, but it seems like that would take away some of the issues on the legislation if the those 4 interim assignments, representatives from legacy boards, sunsetted July 1st. And then the language is, you know, it's clear the interim board members, being the remaining 13, would still have the ability of their organizations to reappoint as necessary. Jim, I also recognize the importance of the knowledge that would potentially be lost, and I recognize that, but I'm just trying to work the legislation. It doesn't, to me, last time I read section 7, I didn't see a satisfactory way of how SDIC could replace Mr. Safinson should he, you know, choose to exit, or any of the 4 legacy districts. So, and I'm not trying to throw a wrench in the wheel here, but it's just more, I'm trying to advocate for Tanny and, you know, carrying this torch on for an additional 6 months and not having a board, not having an attorney. You know, he's just going to be a lone person carrying his ideas forward, which will add value, I'm certain. But, you know, if he has to consult, he can't access Brian after that point. There would be no funds for that. So I just want to make sure he's supported.
We're open to working with Jeff Condit if you all think that's it's interesting, Tom. I appreciate the creativity. I'm curious, Tanny, what you think, and I'd be happy to check in with the other legacy district reps to get their sense. My sense is they would prefer to stay on the board, but I don't mean to speak for you, Tanny.
That would kind of be my sense too, especially for MCDD, Pen 2, and I would also say Sandy, just because I think that's needed given the makeup of the board. To try to do some type of transition and carry some institutional knowledge forward. Question though, the section 7 and 8, aren't those new language?
Section 7 is new language from the September version, but it's the version that's the same version that you received as
Right.
in the
But
urban
shouldn't those
board
be
packet.
bolded? Aren't those a change?
It's a new section that doesn't exist at all, not a change to an existing section.
But it's new language.
Right. And I guess one thing to note, which is also important, is that this is proposed modifications that Legislative Council will take into account, right? And so what comes back is not going to look exactly like this. This is, maybe a more developed legislative concept. It might be a different way of thinking about it. So we will get another sort of bite at the apple as far as if there are some other changes. So this is over in Legislative Council right now, but yes, we could embolden that if that helps for readability.
I was just going to say, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but there's where we were and there's where we are, and trying to figure out, I guess, how to deal with the hand that you're dealt. I know Troutdale is less than enthused, which I think is a concern for us, since that's the map holder that we represent. But you got to go back when this thing started in 2015, okay, which is a long time ago. But SDIC told Troutdale, because that's what we thought, that there weren't going to be landowner assessments, and this was going to be a great deal for them, and the improvements were going to cost $4 million and all these other things. And fast forward to where we are now, it's completely different. And I guess for me, I want to make this the best I can. And it's not going to be what it was going to be, but it certainly can be. I think it can be better. I think we can do the best we can, because I think we owe them that. I think we've, right or wrong, we've made a lot of promises and we really haven't kept them, in my personal opinion. And I think that's a bad look for us, and I'd like to try to fix that. And that's the only reason I'm on that board, is to try to make this better for the people that we represent. And I think that we owe them that. And I think we're getting there, but I don't know that we're, we voted to move ahead with the legislation, but that vote was also 10-6. And I know those that count votes, it's like, yeah, we slammed it because it was 10-6, but I wouldn't want to have something like this at a 10-6 vote. I'd like to have it better than that.
I guess I feel compelled to tell you, Tanny, that despite having majority direction to move forward, the staff has spent considerable time talking with you and Brian and Dave Ritma and Corky, and we've made additional changes to the legislation to respond to the issues that you've raised, despite having a majority vote, that we didn't need to do that. So I just want to point that out for the other members of the board.
No,
And we're happy to keep working with you, but what I need from you is specific recommendations for changes. We've gone over the promises issue, and Tanny, I believe we've come as close as we possibly can, given the cards we were dealt, to meet those promises. And we've lowered the costs. We've taken over the gate tower. We've addressed a huge component of the compression on the floodplain, and we've taken it as far as we can. If you're not happy, you can vote no, but we've come a long way to address those concerns. And I regret that people before me made promises that have proven impossible to keep.
Yeah, we don't need to do all this today. Okay.
Annalise, any thoughts? And you could say no as well.
Yeah, I think I have some concerns that Tom, I just want to say, like, thank you for thinking of additional solutions. Metro is not wed to a single solution to resolve this. And I appreciate, Brian, you raising this issue to begin with. I think I have concerns that, though, that your solution will not land well with some of our other board members, and I do think there is real importance to having that legacy board perspective on the interim board. So I think I would like to move forward with what is currently in the legislation, and not pursue this idea, but open to other ones for sure.
Brian, do you have any other comments pending discussion?
I think that I've addressed my main points here, from a legal perspective and from a process perspective. I mean, possibly, maybe it would be beneficial for Colin to explain the legislative process for this, so that we know the potential timing on things like this, so that we know when to act. I mean, it might have been addressed in the memo. I had a very small chance to skim this. As far as the timing from introduction to potential passage, so that we know when the interim board would have authority to call for dissolution, and then we can actually go through how much time we might have between that timing as well as July 1st, so that we know how much time we have to act and what potential issues we could solve in that time. Because I mean, I'm looking at this as a possibility of it goes in as proposed right now. It goes to committee. It may go further out of committee. It might get chopped up in committee. Might get a completely different package than we put in. The bill might get stuffed and gutted. Are gutted and stuffed. There's a whole lot of different possibilities that could happen. So maybe just sort of explaining the legislative process with potential timing, so that we know what kind of decision points that we can make at those times.
I can at least go through what I know, and you know, Annalisa and Taylor might have some further insights that they might be able to share too on timing. So this was submitted to committee staff and then bringing that to legislative council sometime next month, which starts tomorrow. So sometime in December or maybe early January, we expect to see what the legislative council sends back to us. In that time, we do intend to work with our lobbyist, Mark Landauer, to have another meeting similar to what we had in late September or very early October, that had all of the government relations folks from the cities. And then we also included some of the additional representatives that didn't have lobbyists on contract or government relations staff. So to have another one of those meetings to make sure that everything looks good, because we will have a chance to work with Jeff Condit to make some revisions or suggested changes. So that should take place sometime in late December or early January. Looking to Annalisa or Taylor if you know any more on that date for the session.
Annalisa, did you want to talk about the legislative calendar maybe and just look at what the dates are specifically? I'm pulling it up here, but I'm sure you know them by heart at this point too.
I do not know them by heart. I appreciate
least,
that faith, but so I'll defer to you to give the dates, but I will say, Colin, generally you nailed
okay. And then we do, yeah. Thank you. We have February 5th is the beginning of the session. So it goes February 5th to March 11th. So that is just barely more than a month. It's very fast. This is a committee bill. Really what they are looking for is, you know, generally that this is something that allows something that has already been created by the Legislative Assembly to be more functional. And so that's really the message here. And so for some general agreement, especially on especially the cities, county that have some of those cost implications that are new or different than what the current legacy districts have. So at the same time, we're also working with Jeff Condit to create some ordinances or templates around the transfer of all of these things. And so for any of the, and look to Lori to fill in a little bit, but for any of the things that are going to be in the upcoming budget, we're really looking late winter, early spring to be working on a lot of those things. So well in advance of July 1st. But Lori, I don't know if you want to, putting you on the spot, but if there's a couple of the steps to walk through just for awareness.
Well, we know because of the timing of the legislative session that the budget timing is going to be an interesting process for us, for the board this year, because I can only bring one version of the budget to the board and propose it. I'm working on two. So behind the scenes, we're getting two budgets ready, the status quo, if we have an extension of the time that we need for the legislative changes, and a full budget for the board to consider. But because of the timing of the session, we're going to have a very short time between the proposed budget and the approved budget for the urban district. So we are bringing a series of topics to the board members that are key issues related to the budget, the full budget for year one, that they can review and discuss and provide us with guidance on prior to bringing them the proposed budget. Those things are cash flow discussion, assessments, and what rate we want to use for the assessments. We've got Eco Northwest working on that data right now, and we'll be bringing that information to the board in December. We're going to bring all of the information about assumptions around staff and staff costs so that the board members can be familiar with that, because that's one of our largest expenditures in the organization. And then we've got this whole category that was kind of a big pool of money in our forecast related to the new responsibilities for the new urban district, and looking to provide some information and gain some feedback from the board members on how they want to allocate those funds, which in the forecast were about $500,000. So we're hoping to have some really good and transparent discussions with our board members prior to bringing forth a proposed budget, so that they'll have an opportunity to have those discussions with us, since we're really not going to have a lot of time once we get into the budget process. We're hoping that's going to make things go a little bit more smoothly. And then frankly, we're going to do a regular budget process for each of our individual legacy districts and roll that into a combined budget for the urban district. If our legislative changes move forward and we're able to move forward with the consolidation. On the accounting and finance side, we've got a whole document that has tasks listed, and we're making assignments and making sure that folks are working on what we need to do to be able to get everything consolidated. Brian, just to respond to your questions about restricted funds, we have a regular process in finance where we account for restricted funds. This will be no different. We have a very good process, and our auditors go through and look at the spending related to restricted funds every year. So we're confident that we'll be able to isolate those funds and make sure that we're spending them appropriately for the carry forward cash. We've already started working on the payroll and benefits side to make sure that we've got all of the structure in place we need to be able to get the employees moved. So there's a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes to make sure that we can make this happen. It's an interesting discussion where we're saying it's either going to happen July 1, 2024, or it might happen later, but we're definitely making sure that we're ready to go, so that in those few months between March and the end of June, that we can make this happen, as long as we have the go ahead. So those are the things that are kind of going on behind the scenes administratively and from a finance perspective.
And there is a kind of high level schedule attached to that memo that walks through some of the decisions that we've identified. And I want to reiterate that Jeff Condit was assigned last week to develop both the revenue ordinance and also an ordinance that involves all the employee and asset transfers. And we hope to be able to present those to the board early in the next calendar year, so that there's plenty of time for evaluation and discussion of those ordinances, because they'll be critical and likely would be best adopted after the legislative session. But you'll have plenty, those months of January, February, March, to dig into those and make sure that we're getting it right.
Right, and sorry, I'll let Alex go first.
No, it was I just like a high level question. So it looks like from my look at the legislation and a look at the memo, the legislation is saying that funds that are coming from SDIC will stay in SDIC moving forward, and those will be expended on ops, capital projects, etc., in the district only. So the legislative intent will
The
be there.
remaining cash.
The remaining cash, yes, the remaining cash there will be used for these things. And once that's approved, we'll operationalize all those changes. Right? That's
Correct.
the main point here, right?
Correct.
We don't need to go through exactly how those will be operationalized right now, just get agreement that in the legislative proposal, we wanted to say very clearly, these funds, these cash funds will stay with SDIC. We all agree to that. Is that the point of this bit of the conversation?
That's correct. And we've
Okay.
identified projects and regular operating costs. And we're
Yeah.
actually looking at that, and that'll be part of the cash flow discussion that we have with the board when we come. I think it's scheduled for January. I need to do it after the assessment discussion, so.
But later, like we're not going to go through those today, right?
No,
Today
we're
is
not
just
going through those today.
conceptual agreement, sort of tick that one off the list and then go through the other main
We
topics
agree
here in
that the
memo.
remaining cash should be restricted for purposes within the historic district boundaries. And we're
Correct.
going to use an existing tactic that restricts funds to do that.
Lori, is that going to be through an ordinance or through the resolution or through the legislation? The binding of the cash.
Colin, can you remind me if that was part of the legislation?
It'll be the
No,
budget
that's not in-
adoption ordinance, not in the legislation.
Correct.
So that'll be part of the asset transfer, but we all agree that that's an appropriate way to use those remaining funds.
And that'll be an
Now-
ordinance. That'll be an ordinance through the urban board.
Correct.
And then the one thing I'm just following up on Brian's prompt was around protection of the landowners on any easements SDIC may have on their properties, and we don't want to hinder their work that they may be undertaking during any transition period. So if staff can just come back with a memo, how that's going to be addressed to minimize any disruption. It's just not clear what the mechanics are going to be.
And again, we have Condit working on that, and and again, Brian, I don't mean to speak for lawyers because I'm not one, but he made it sound like it wasn't a particularly unique or challenging proposition to create an ordinance to do that. But that's why we're going to give the board several months to review those proposed ordinances. And Brian will certainly, I'm sure, help us make those airtight.
Thanks, Jim. Armand, I saw your hand up earlier and you dropped it. I just want to circle back and make sure we didn't miss something.
Yeah, no, thank you, Tom. I just wanted to make sure, since we had Lori here, that we talked about the restricting of funds, which just happened. So thanks.
Brian, I think you wanted to say something, and you were very polite to let the rest of us step on you.
Yeah, my apologies for not raising my hand out of order. So as far as some of these triggering events when it comes to asset transfers and things like that, just to put this out there for a consideration on the timing of this. I mean, it's good to have these potential ordinances and asset transfer things working on it, but I wouldn't want to be premature on actually going through and approving these prior to a dissolution call. And so just making sure that's a consideration out there so that just in case, I mean, it's good to prepare for this, but just making sure that it's explicit that those kinds of things would be taking place after a dissolution call from the either interim or permanent board, depending on what happens with the legislation.
Yep.
Thanks.
Tanny, do you feel this discussion today has helped you with your role on the interim board?
I think it has. There's still needs to be a discussion with Troutdale. Figure out, how that connects with what SDIC is doing. And so if we call for dissolution, right, and we're trucking along and things, certain things aren't being met, what's our process then? If SDIC
So-
is comfortable with something,
I want to clarify that under the legislative proposal, there is no call for dissolution. Jesus.
it just
All
dissolves.
blown up. It happens on July, upon the transfer of the revenue authority. And so what you see in the schedule of work leading up to that is the development of the debt distribution plan, singular, because we believe there's only one, that's MCDD. And then there is all the other asset transfer ordinances that are adopted and become effective upon that transfer of revenue authority. I think I got that right. But all of that work would be done. And then, Brian, to your question, the ordinances would be considered and discussed and debated and adopted by the board, but would take effect once that legislative authority hits on midnight, July 1st. So help me understand your question, Tanny. If SDIC has concerns, help me understand what those might be, and we can try and figure out how they get addressed.
Yeah, let's say SDIC's has concerns, legal concerns about easements and things of that nature, and those don't appear to be answered. What is the move at that point?
I don't know. I believe the ordinance is really straightforward and those assets transfer pretty easily, but that's an interesting question. I don't know
But
that I want to
wouldn't
posit
some of
an
this
answer.
would be
Brian, do you have any
conditions
suggestions? I
of
mean,
that?
you could sue, you could, I don't know. That's an interesting question. My goal is to ensure that doesn't happen.
So if I understand the question correctly, the legislative proposal has been passed and signed into law, or goes into effect by operational law. What happens if there is disagreement and things progress as to and things don't transfer over smoothly or things like that. I think that my understanding would be that SDIC would be dissolved. There would not be an entity there. There's a possibility that there would be unanswered questions as to who exactly owns that real estate interest that could be solved in a quiet title action in circuit court. So I think that would be a question there. I don't know the exact language of the ordinance or the legislation as to if there was a complete transfer of title. I'd have to go through exactly what was passed there to figure out if a court would possibly determine that either that asset was included and in the legislation, and the intent of the legislation was that all assets being tangible, intangible, real estate associated interests, if those automatically transfer as a matter of law, or if there's a question as to the completeness of it. So I think that there would be some legal questions there that wouldn't be easily answered, that would probably have to go through some sort of judicial process. It could also be required that the district be rewound up to solve some of these questions, similar to what they do with other corporations. When there's something that's been dissolved, you have a court ordering that the corporation be reincorporated to go through and make some of these decisions. So my intent was to have everything as smoothly and as seamlessly handed over as possible. And so my suggestion would be to have a potential list of properties there that are subject to these easements that SDIC can go through and receive and grant quitclaim deeds to those property interests, so that they are handed over cleanly and easily to the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District. And so it appears in the property records, and there's not a large chain of paper that somebody has to go through to try and interpret exactly what was transferred over. I think that having that quitclaim deed that gives specific title to those specific property interests, I think that'd be the cleanest solution. Maybe it would be more work intensive, but to know exactly what kind of assets are out there and how they're going to be transferred would be that'd be a proposal that I would make. I know it's going to be in a short time frame, but time frame of months. It'd be difficult to put that together, and so I see some challenges there. I mean, depending on what the ordinances say and what the final legislative process is, I would be very interested to know exactly how that plays out.
Thank you, Brian. I just want to recognize time. I see there's some questions, but I just want to recognize we are at time. Are we okay running late here and continuing the discussion? Annalise, you're good? Tanny, you're good? Okay. Alex, you had your hand up?
Hi, yeah, I'm sorry. Quick question here. So, of course, everybody wants all the property title stuff to go cleanly because we want it both for this district and we want it for the effective operation of the new district. So I think everybody has a joint interest in having all of those real estate transactional things go through smoothly and cleanly and completely. I was just curious though, the core concern driving this, are we worried that property owners will have a bit of confusion? Are we worried that the district won't have it? Like, what's the driver of the worry that we won't do this responsibly as the two districts working together?
My concern is that we'd be harming our landowners that we represent presently by clouding their title.
Okay, so clean title for the residents is the driver of this consideration.
Yeah, correct. As board members and district members, we need to consider their interests.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just, as new and following up for the port, I just want to make sure I had a clear understanding of what the issue is, because I think we all have an interest in making sure that all of the title work goes through cleanly and effectively, both for the residents and for everybody on the staff doing the work within the district, because we don't want anything to slow us down as we do all the levy modernization.
Yep.
Okay.
Colin?
Annalisa, why don't you go first, please?
Well, I was just noting time. I do have a hard stop at 11:30. So I appreciate this really great conversation, Brian and others, but I'm wondering, what is there some sort of, what do we need to accomplish in this meeting? Is there kind of a head nod that I need to give? I just, really want to start with just a thank you to Brian for, I feel like, really listening and capturing the concerns and board direction from the last meeting and working so hard, I know, over the last month or so with MCDD staff to figure out how to get, this board's concerns addressed. What I read felt like it was absolutely in line with what we had talked about. I feel very good about it. What else is kind of needed? I just want to make sure that we have time to have that discussion.
Annalise, I'll throw out my principal objective here was really to support Tanny, who was raising these questions to Brian. And that really, and I had a conversation with both Jim and Brian, and it really drove, let's bring Tanny back and bring the SDIC board back so we can kind of talk together. And that's really what I had hoped for. And that was my question to Tanny. Did he feel this helped him in his dialogue? Because there's so many rich topics that are being discussed at the urban that we are not even exposed to. So Tanny, if there's other aspects you were hoping to get from it as well.
Who else had their hand up?
Colin, do you still have a question, comment?
No, unnecessary. Thank you.
Yep, my intent for having this meeting was to make sure that we had an open discussion as to what the proposed legislation was, and to flush out those kinds of brainstorming events that we needed to do to either discuss what we liked, what we think needs improvement, and to make sure that the board had an opportunity to do this, because I know that we didn't have an opportunity to discuss this with staff prior to it necessarily being introduced to the urban district. And so I wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for those kinds of open discussions in a public meeting on the record, going through and making sure that we have an opportunity to at least deliberate on this. I don't know if there's necessarily a work product that needs to come out of this meeting, but to the extent that we've identified our concerns, had an opportunity to get the sort of plan of action for what this proposed legislation has, I think it's good that everybody is sort of brought up to speed at the same time and not necessarily going through back channel communications that are necessary and are good, but just so that everybody's brought up to speed at the same time and has the same sort of information that they can make their best decisions with.
Yeah, and Brian said it is, we're representing the Sandy landowners, not the urban broader organization. So kind of, and that's where Tanny is, carries two hats. So thank you again, Tanny, for walking that tightrope. So
I have a few potential brainstorm suggestions for next steps. May I proffer them, and you guys can tell me I'm nuts. Brian and Tanny, I regret, Brian, you didn't get that memo yesterday. That sucks.
Okay.
Thank you for trying to get through it. It would be really helpful if you could read that and talk with Tanny about it and see if we've been successful in addressing those initial concerns. And if not, would you let us know? Because we'd love to keep working on it. And then what I would love is, Tanny, if you can work with Brian and share any specific changes that you'd like to make to the proposed legislative modifications. We're going to get one shot at that. And so we have some time, but not a lot of time. And it would be most helpful to get specific edits to that. And then we can either come back to this board or go to the urban board with the appropriate approach on reviewing those if we need to. And then I would just like to commit, I think we would benefit as a staff to have Jeff Condit work directly with Brian, if it's permissible with the SDIC board, to develop and review those draft ordinances that Jeff is working on before they get revealed to the board, so that Brian could have his line of sight on that. He's been very helpful in the past. So if SDIC is willing to pay for that time, we would benefit from that. And I can commit to making that happen. And then Tanny, I'd like you to think about how I can support you or what information I can provide to try and address the issue of Troutdale and where Troutdale wants to be on this, because it's important to me that they get heard and that ideally they're in a neutral position at worst. So we have that work to do. Those are the three things that I sort of took out of this. Are those helpful?
I understand. And so just so I understand, what would be your preferred timing on any sort of submission of specific edits to the legislation?
I want to get some help from my government relations professionals on that.
Okay.
What do you guys think?
I think if there's anything, sending them over sooner than later. I think Mark Landauer, we're going to be looking to pull people together, and probably not next week, but the following week if possible, so that ahead of the holidays, it's going to be a real quick turnaround. Taylor put it in the chat that's due to get the bill back January 8th and then turning around on January 12th. So we want to be ready for anything that we might want to tuck in there. So ahead of the holidays. So if possible, getting those comments over
into next week.
Yep, would be good.
Okay.
And we all know the legislative process will unfold, and we'll have a chance to influence committees and so on to some degree. But
Jim, your summary was spot on for me, and I'm supportive of SDIC supporting Tanny and utilizing Brian to support a review of the ordinances. Are we needing?
I might even make that a little bit more robust and have him help support the drafting of them, but that just to make sure we get the scope of work right. But the two of them can work that out.
Yeah, I don't, Wendy, we're not needing a motion on that, are we? Or yeah. So Annalise, your thoughts on that? Are we okay? Okay.
It's totally up to the board, Tom, but I don't think that's
I
necessary.
don't think we need the direction for that level of expenditure.
Okay. Taylor, you have your hand up?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple things. First of all, I appreciate this conversation coming into it a little bit at the end here, but sort of understanding the legislative process as it applies to this. I just wanted to remind everyone, short session is really short, and there are a lot of things that are floating in the ether in terms of potential conflict with the legislature specifically. And so the best way to be successful in getting something through short session is to have it ready to go. And that timeline between the bill back deadline and the bill drop deadline is only a week. I mean, we realistically, Ledge Council is going to be totally bombarded with a whole bunch of different edits and requests. And so if we can ideally work with them this week, next week, in the process before that deadline, so that we don't have edits after the bill back deadline, we will be much more successful in having a bill that looks like what we want and is ready to go. And if we can get the bill, if it doesn't have controversy, we can get that hearing sooner. We can get it through committee and we can get it to the floor and just sort of get it done in the beginning so that those more complicated conversations as they start to unfold don't have an impact on the timeline for our legislation. So I just really want to reiterate that, SDIC as a board is representing the landowners in Sandy, and the new district is SDIC, and SDIC is the new district ultimately. We are becoming, this new district. So to the extent that we can make sure that we can have successful legislation, we can leverage the $100 million in federal funding, and we can, partner to make this a successful endeavor for both the Sandy Drainage District landowners, but also everybody that benefits from that levy. So, I think it's really good to have these conversations and talk about edits that we need and talk about what the legislation needs to look like now. And Brian, thank you so much for all the work you've put into your edits and working with Armand and MCDD and everybody. So, to the extent that the county can be helpful in this, we do have a lobbyist that's assigned to this. It's not going to be me since I'm now in the department. I'm not a registered lobbyist anymore, but I'll be supporting her in this as much as I can. And I'm sure Mark's already having these conversations with Ledge Council too. So I just want to say time really is of the essence, but we do have this opportunity and it's really important to get it right, because as we advance closer to session, any sort of unaddressed concerns, if they come out later, it's not going to be, it might not be a successful endeavor for us.
I'll pile on. And if we can't get something in legislation and there's other ways to address concerns, let's talk about them. Not everything has to go through the legislature. We can develop ordinances or guidance or direction or budget items or other things that's, we serve the cities. It'd be really great to have unanimous lack of opposition to this effort.
Right. And so as I've discussed with both the board members and Armand, I think that this is regardless of the legislation happening or not, this is going to be necessary work. And so even though it is sort of an advanced time frame from what's in ORS 550 right now, I do think that these are productive conversations and working out some of the kinks. And so I do think it's productive work, and irregardless of what happens with the legislation. And so I just want to thank everyone's effort on this. I think that moving forward and doing things that benefit everybody in the most practical way is very helpful. And I commend everybody's efforts on this. So thank you.
Brian, I think you were offered up to participate in this review. Is your calendar open to that task?
Yeah, I should be able to do that. I've gotten proposed resolutions and ordinances and things like that from Hong before, and we've worked through those. And so I'm familiar with the process, wouldn't have any problems doing that. And so I think that should be fine.
Great. Thank you. I know it's just a short turnaround.
That's fine.
Any other further discussion topics or comments from the group?
Danny, I know it's not easy to keep raising these concerns. Thank you for doing so. I hope we can get closer to satisfying your needs.
I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Annalise has already left, so we are not at quorum, but thank you, everyone. Alex for being here and Taylor for joining us today. and everyone for their work towards this effort. Much appreciated.
Cheers,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thanks
Thanks,
for having
Tom.
me today.
Thanks a lot.